already show you some screenshots as well of the early prototypes of that. But let's get started. So what are the steps in these content value chains that I was talking about? The first step is publish and promote. So what people tended to overlook, which ChatGPT is now changing these days, is that semantic technologies, language models, AI can also be used for content generation and not for just analyzing third-party content. And then once you have created content, you also want to disseminate your own content to the world. So both for the creation of content and for the dissemination of content, semantic technologies can play an important part. The second one, listen and predict. I mean, listen is, I think, that one area that most people associate with semantic technologies anyway. What we have added already 2-3 years ago is predictive capabilities, that you're not able to analyze the public debate, for example, right now or in the last 3 or 6 months, but also extract knowledge about the future from that debate. And then the third one, integrate and visualize, meaning these technologies can work as a hub to gather together, to cross-link automatically heterogeneous sources from a variety of modes. That could be unstructured data, it can be structured data, knowledge graphs that some of you might be familiar with. They can actually help tying all this together in a consistent model without a lot of manual curation effort. That's the first overview slide. By the way, before I continue, who has an IT background in here? Marketing or other backgrounds?
Yeah, writing, basically.
Sorry? Writing. Okay. So step one is very relevant for you. Data visualization. Okay, perfect. So this is the cycle that most semantic content processing pipelines go. Also shows what our platform is doing. First, data ingestion. You know, the more sources, the more flexible, the more scalable, the better. We have news media, stakeholder websites, user-generated content from various platforms. It could be in-house systems, organizational memory applications, CMS, multimedia archives, editorial databases in a newspaper, for example. So whatever exists out there that contains textual information can, of course, be tapped into and through REST APIs or other interfaces be connected. Connect, collect, filter. There's a lot of work to actually get chaotic content that's out there into a clean form. Deduplication, boilerplate removal. You want to get rid of all the ads, of all the sidebar elements, of all the scripts in web pages, for example, which is then when the interesting things start. So we have opinion mining, knowledge graphs, story detection, classification, prediction. That's all steps you can do with semantic technologies. And this is also the area where language models like GPT-3 are, of course, very important, that we use heavily as well. I heard on Friday there will be a talk about ChatGPT and probably also some of the others. So we have been using them for a while. We did experiment GPT-3, which is the base for ChatGPT. But for all applications, actually, BERT and T5, which are other language models, probably not as large as GPT-3, but more flexible in their application. We've been using that for a while as well. And then enrich is the annotation step. So the idea is you collect all these resources, you clean them up, you store them, and you enrich them with metadata automatically. Because without metadata, there's little analysis you can do. And the metadata includes sentiment, for example. Is it positive or negative? It can include emotions, which we'll also talk about today. Automated summaries, named entity extraction and resolution, finding persons, organizations, events in the coverage. Geotagging, which is a subset of the named entity recognition, recognizing entities of the type geographic references, so cities, countries, etc. So all this happens once a document passes through the pipeline, ends up in a database, and then various ways to use the content ingested, but also the metadata that the content has been enriched with. And For that, our platform supports a variety of formats. Weblis.com/dashboard. So we have two versions of the dashboard. I'm going to show you both live today. Why two versions? We found out that the demands on the dashboard can vary very significantly depending on the use case and the user group you're talking. So we have a professional version, which is our flagship application, which consumes probably most of our development resources. But it's a high-end analytics, which is definitely geared to professionals, and it's not for a casual user who just wants to explore some content. For that, it's too complex, and it requires a trainings workshop. That's why we said, well, we need a light version, and we actually have a brand new one that was just finished 2 weeks ago. I've been working on it 2 years, which tries to get a subset of functionality, but all the essentials, but in a format that is very easy to learn, doesn't have a huge learning curve, and people can just explore and also use it very effectively on a mobile phone. So that was the goal of the light version. If you go to that URL, you'll see actually 2 tutorials. If you want to hear a bit more, today I don't have so much time for the live demo, but the speaker also has a much better accent than me. So they're both for the light and the professional version. You find 7 and 10-minute tutorials. You can generate PDFs for the printer, for slides. Very important for collaborations with other partners. So that's both for our research projects, but also for commercial clients. We have APIs where you can access information, but also send in information in various formats, the documents themselves, the keywords, the metadata. So it's really important to have this modular, because we participate in a lot of research projects funded by the European Commission, and then you're always together with 5 to 8, or even, we have one project with 30 partners, and they all want to interchange information. And sometimes we actually serve as the system integrator in these projects. So we are the central hub where they all store and access their data. Well, and then the last one is a story pack, which I'm going to show you in a second. But before we continue with the slides, let's dive into quick demo. So this is just our internal demo site. It's the entry screen of this light dashboard. And now pre-selected, it looks at the last 2 months of the coverage, and it looks at Australian news media. It's just a subset. It's in our larger projects, we have NGO websites, scientific publications, any other stakeholder websites. So it doesn't have to be just news, but I think news is just very easy to comprehend, and it's also not focused on a particular domain, so very good for demos. So let's say we want to analyze brands like telecommunication companies, for example. So you just start as it would be a search. Let's have a look at Telstra. So it does start and resemble a normal search engine. You can just mouse over here. You can get automated summaries on the right of each article, and it leads to the original page. So far, so good. So you know that format. The next tab, now here you have tabs with the various visualizations. So we have now done a tag cloud on Telstra over the last 2 months. And usually you don't want to analyze just one brand, but you want to compare brands or topics or persons, you name it. So let's go for Vodafone and Optus. So now you see in the search results highlighted, the color always now represents the associations with that brand. And now you have a multicolor tag cloud that shows you in blue the associations with Telstra, in yellow the associations with Vodafone, and in brown the associations with Optus. If you need to do some on-the-fly disambiguation, for example, if you want to have, you can exclude certain terms, for example, stadium. If you're less interested about Red Hot Chili Peppers playing this weekend, for example, but rather about the telecom brand. You can just say, well, give me everything but the stadium. You apply it, and you can refine your results on the fly. You might have noticed this little slider element, so you can also adapt how granular you want your visualizations and how many of these associations should be shown. Moving on, because I don't want to spend too much time here in the demo, the keyword graph is a very similar representation, just not alphabetically, but hierarchical, but it also allows you to explore the associations with your search terms. The longitudinal aspect we have implemented in various ways. The trend chart, which is, of course, a very well-known metaphor. If we give the system a few seconds, it also tries to find peaks now in the charts and then labels the peaks with keywords that are representing well what's happening here. Because if you just watch a chart and you don't actually see what's happening there, it's only of limited use, because you would then have to dig in and find out, well, what happened in that week. And so the system tries to take over that work for you and just finds the peaks and then labels them with the top 3 keywords to show what were the drivers of the coverage. A similar visualizations that focus on the longitudinal trend stream graph, which now also you see since mid-December, shows the top stories together with these 3 brands. Mind you, the disambiguation was just done, by including stadium. If you do this for real and in an actual project, the disambiguation would be much more fine-grained and professional. And so I'm just saying this. If there are some keywords you might think they're out of context, that's not surprising, because we didn't really focus on any customization here. This next tab shows also these stories, the stories that you have seen in the stream graph in visual form, in a more traditional way, which clusters together automatically. You see how many articles are in each cluster, picks a lead document, and then all the related documents. So there is also semantic similarity in the background, which is also used for our cluster map. The cluster map is now takes out the trend and the temporal distribution, but it shows nicely the top clusters in the content. And through the color coding, you see that some clusters are driven just by one of the brands. That's maybe something that's related just to one particular organization. And there might be other topics that are across the brands, which might be an industry trend or an event where they all participate. Then we have a geographic map. So this is this named entity recognition and resolution in action. So if you now want to drill down on Brisbane, for example, you only get the subset of documents that mean Brisbane, or you want the subset of documents that mention Perth, you just click on the city and you get the focus. This, by the way, works also with the tech cloud. I forgot to show this. If you're interested in an aspect of the coverage, like employer, you can also click on anywhere in these charts and you do an immediate drill down on that particular keyword. So all these charts are interactive. In the Pro version, they're even more interactive and you see more advanced tooltips. I can actually quickly. What did it do? I didn't want to do that.
The tech cloud are all uni brands?
No, we can do, but this is a Pro feature. So let's go Pro.
Pro feature, okay.
So let's Telstra. So now I've done a query for Telstra. I've selected metadata attribute sentiment. So now I do a sentiment analysis on Telstra over time. And if this is the latest release, we can actually now have bigrams and trigrams as well. So now you have a bigram analysis of the positive and negative sentiment association with Telstra. And because I said we also have a better tooltip, so now if you click on something that's interested to you, executives, for example, You click on it and you get this little tooltip. The tooltip shows you an in-context preview of the trend line. It shows you the top stories, and it gives you Boolean operators to refine your search. Let's go back. For example, you're not interested in gambling for whatever reason. So I click on gambling and you can say exclude. And every document that includes gambling is now excluded from the analysis, and everything is being redone. So you see, this is much more powerful. You have like a lot of different visualizations in here. You can do an analysis of the sources, of the entities. But I don't want to make today's presentation just about the dashboard. So I wanted to show you the light version because it shows you the main visualization and it gets you a feel for the system. This is the Pro version, much more functionality, but it comes at the price that to fully use that with all its bells and features, we know you need like a 3 to 5 hour workshop to really understand it. And that's for some use cases, that's an obstacle. That means it might not be implemented, which was the motivation for the light dashboard. But let's go back. If we have time at the end, we can of course return. Are there any questions so far before we move on with our steps in the life cycle? Not yet. I hope that's a good sign.
I'm just curious about the processing where you have Australians.
Yeah.
You have Australia.
Yeah.
And you don't have Australian. With the plural. So during one of the slides that you had before.
Yeah.
Maybe during the demo, there's the word Australians with an S.
Yeah.
Which is the plural. But I can't seem to find the word Australian without the S.
Did you? I mean.
Yeah, I'm just curious about how.
I actually did define a bookmark here for a screenshot.
Yeah.
So you can, for example, define here Australia.
Yeah.
You can do lots of things here. So you have fully regular expressions, so you can combine it together with, and then you have Australian singular plural. And you can even, you have a little preview feature that expands your regular expression so that people who don't know regular expression actually know what is being accounted here with.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between the second class and the sixth class?
Nothing. That was me being in a hurry.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can just click it away.
Yeah.
And it's all real time, you can just add.
You add
New South Wales, for example.
Yeah.
And you get a preview how many counts that would be, and then you save it, and then it's stored in a bookmark, and you can use it next time in the analysis. So that's also something I didn't show for the lack of time. This we have a lot of metadata handles here we can use for disambiguation purposes in the search. So we have Boolean operators. So there's lots of things, but that would definitely be beyond today's presentation. But there's a lot of fine tuning, and it has full regular expression support, and it's also cross-lingual. You can do this across 8 different languages, and it actually translates things in the background. So you can query it on climate change, and then you can get climate change coverage in the 7 other languages, and it automatically integrates the results. So you can actually analyze languages you don't even speak with the system.
It automatically translate to one language or to the target language that you use?
Well, let's see, is it configured now? Let me see if I can. I'm clearing for climate change now. And if I add now German and Spanish content. Right, so let's remove the English one, which might be dominant. Hang on, because I have News Australia, I need to select international news. Yeah, you see now Klimawandel, which is the German. So I can I just created a tech cloud on the top associations with climate change in German media coverage without knowing anything about the German language. So you know the system does all this in the background, and if you want to do, especially in Europe, you know, in Australia might not be so relevant, but in Europe, when you want to have a pan-European system, you need analysis that span like 7-8 languages. There's no point in doing this manually, so the system can do this in the background.
So you automatically translate the German into and then integrate it.
Exactly. So this is I can change that now. Say, well, you know, and I can change the inter language to French. Now what I would have done is I've used an English term to query for climate change. I'm searching in German coverage and I'm presenting the results in French. So you can mix and match languages as you like. Yeah. All right, but now really back to my slides. Otherwise I'm going to run out of time. Yeah. No, that's good. You know, that's why it should be interactive. I don't want to discourage question, but so after this short demo as an introduction about the capabilities of the platform, let's go back to the step. First one, publish and promote. And the first one is content optimization. And this is what our new StoryPact company is all about. I mean, StoryPact used to be product, which we have been developing for more than 2 years. But now we decided it deserves its own legal entity. And then also present some search applications of our technology. So the idea of StoryPact is you're a content author, you're a journalist, you're a blog, you are authoring a web page in the spirit of search engine optimization. So any content that you like. There are various ways and technologies that have been discussed. I mean, you know, everyone knows now ChatGPT and the question answering system, but you probably don't want to always, you know, need a question answering system. Your need might be much more specific as an author, and you might also not want to give up creativity. I mean, there's this data-driven journalism thing, you know, systems that generate text. We didn't want to do this. We want to still have the human and the content creator in the center, but use semantic technologies to provide recommendations for how to tweak the wording to get more impact. And it's not the latest, but it's about half a year ago, the prototype looked like this. So it's editor-based. So that's a press release from NOAA, one of our, or actually our first customer since 2008. And with the same technologies that you saw in the dashboard, for example, we are creating keywords automatically that describe this article. And then we color code this. So this is now not sentiment, but this is if these terms were frequently or rarely searched. So we have access to the Google Keyword API that tells us a prediction in the next 48 hours, how often are these terms are going to be searched. So pretty much how popular are they at the moment. What the system now does, it looks for terms. You see it's underlined blue. That's usually used for the spell checker. So we adopted the visual and use it for an impact checker or hype checker. So if we find a term that has low search volume and we find a synonym for it with higher search volume, we suggest the user, why don't you replace it with that? Because you're still saying the same thing, but you will pick a word that people are actually actively looking for, which is much more powerful. And when you write a web page, this is what you want, and hopefully will increase your organic ranking with it. So that's just one. You see there's like lots of buttons and features. So there are many other author features in here, but that's one of the core propositions of this editor. And some of the visualizations, you know, like our geographic map or these related documents on click, that's also built in here as a recommendation on the side. The idea here is to simplify workflows. Normally people write something and then they go on a search engine and try to find stuff that, you know, what could I write as well? So we want to present it all while people write. So you just write your story and it looks on the right side where in the world are related stories appearing, what are they writing, and if you're interested, you just click on it. So it's an implicit, so instead of putting in an explicit query through a search term, the system monitors what's being written and reacts to what's being written automatically, so that the text that the user writes is translated into a search query. through these keywords down here.
So as an author, you can specify the keyword?
I'm sorry?
As an author, you can specify.
You can modify them. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Because no system is perfect. You get some keyword recommendations of the system, which just looks, what is key for this document compared to all the other documents the system has seen. But you might actually want to focus on something else. So you can click them away, and you can add new ones, or you can say highlight them. Then they must appear in the documents that are used for the recommendations. So normally it does a query on all these with or. If you highlight it, it needs to be in the document. And if you click it away, you remove that focus. And the set of keywords here is sort of the semantic fingerprint to look out for the candidate set of documents that we use for generating the recommendations.
Right. So when you generate the recommendations with the keywords began, you recommend started, commenced.
No, that's a different application. That's sort of rather independent because this is just a cached lookup to the Google statistics, and it just needs to look up our synonym database. So that's a different application. So the two are not related. This is more to recommend related terms.
Yeah.
There's also like a tag cloud where you can have the system suggest new terms, keywords, aspects of the story you're not yet mentioning in your text, but for example, that users search for a lot. Right. And for these type of recommendations, you need a corpus to look for to generate the recommendations. And this corpus you can control with this set of keywords.
So the synonym database is what you build? Is it manually built, or is
it's we have our own knowledge graph, so we store it in our knowledge graph. Also, the whole taxonomy comes from several public resources, and we keep optimizing it as well. Good. So this is the first step: a tool for authors to provide content that has more impact. Of course, very relevant for many people because it's an attention game, and everyone wants to capture a large audience, of course. Another way to not capture the audience, but once you have the audience, to make them happy or find your site appealing, is to present your own information to the world, or can also be used within an organization in a more appealing manner. So we have been doing this for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US, so the US Climate Change Agency. And for them, we are in real time collecting their own content, plus the content of 13 other federal agencies. So we, several times an hour, we see what these organizations are publishing, we are processing it, and then we're putting this information into the search of climate.gov. So when you go to climate.gov in the upper right corner, that search field, and all these sidebars, some of these visualizations that's provided by us. So they run their system on a Drupal website, and we have expanded that and use actually similar technologies that you've seen in StoryPack, where we have the sidebar with the content recommendations. We use here for navigational search aids. And we classify, for example, the content automatically in the main facets that NOAA deems important. And then you can get this cluster map that you already know from the live dashboard. And their own content is presented by color to what it relates to. And there's some ways to change the color coding as well, interactively. So that would be another application. So the first step is create content, provide recommendations how to fine-tune that content. The second one, you have content on your own website. You can, if you like, mix and match it with other people's content, and then present it through an enterprise search application. Now, the next step, now we're coming back to the more traditional applications, is now analyzing not only your content, but everyone's content out there. And the idea is story detection to automatically extract, well, what is the web? What is a particular stakeholder group on the web talking about? Or also any organization, am I successful with my communication and marketing activities? And that's not only brands like, you know, Telstra and Optus, but that's also government agencies, any type of organization wants, of course, their activities being mentioned in the debate, but also mentioned in a mostly positive context. If you'd like to read more about, sorry?
I'm just reading Albert's paper name. The title is Effective Models.
Yeah.
Scharl used to work on effective for imaging.
Yeah, so it all can be sort of classified into effective knowledge extraction. Sentiment, emotions, opinions, moods. I mean, it's all effective knowledge as compared to factual knowledge. And some of the things I'm going to present on the next slide, if you want to read more. So this paper is publicly available and talks a bit about the multiple ways we extract emotions from the debate. All right, and here is this overview slide which compares various ways people tend to measure the success of communication. Also shows a little bit the evolution of our own platform. So you start with the share of voice. Are people talking more about me than my competitor? Okay, very simple to measure. Sentiment, positive and negative, which is a good indicator, but I think it's often overused in its interpretation. People get in panic if there's negative sentiment and they're just, you know, pleased with themselves if it's positive, but it's just a linguistic indicator. It can fluctuate a lot and it needs to be properly disambiguated as well. Just think of a positive COVID test. So there's a lot of things that can be not as they seem when you just run the analysis with a lot of effort. And human emotions are just richer than just positive and negative. It's an oversimplification as well, which you can do with emotion extraction. So this is Plutchik's wheel of emotion. That's around for a long time. There's also like more NLP-based approaches like Cambria's hourglass of emotion and similar frameworks. So they are all effective models. How can I capture human emotions? And Plutchik, we have here joy, trust, fear, surprise, etc. So these are the main dimensions. So you have 8 dimensions of human emotion, according to Plutchik. And then you have the more in the center, the stronger the emotion. So you have annoyance, anger, and rage. So the more you're in the center, the stronger that emotion. And emotion detection does the same thing like sentiment analysis. It tries not to only create positive and negative, extract positive and negative emotions, but it tries to extract the prevalence of any of these 24 emotional subtypes. This is already much more powerful than sentiment, but it's still a very standardized model. It's still very generic. It has nothing to do with your own organization, with your organizational goals, with your specific communication. What you're trying, if you have a brand, you want to position it. And you ask the system, are we successful? Well, how can the system tell you if you're successful if you haven't told the system what your goals are? Or sentiment, you know, if you're a climate change agency and you run satellites that warn from disasters and hurricanes, I mean, you will always be in the negative sentiment. So all these are not very good measures of success. So that's why we have this brand reputation radar, which you can either feed with standard marketing terms. So this is Acker's brand personality dimensions. Sincerity, competence, ruggedness, sophistication, excitement. We just added sustainability on the slide here. Or you could ask your marketing department, well, what do we want to stand for? You have an afternoon workshop, and then you have, these are the 5 things that we would really want to represent with your brand. You can define them. You can actually define them in real time. And then you can measure how am I doing compared to my other competitors. And then if the other colors would be my competitors, you can do a campaign and say, well, I want to be perceived more confident because that's my weakness. Then the campaign should actually move you out on that dimension. Good. Last but not least, the wisdom success metric is where we try to encapsulate that all. put it into the context of other KPIs and also provides the longitudinal view. So when you look at these, it's also fully customizable. When you look at these sliders, you still see the positive, neutral, and negative sentiment. So the gray and the green and the red are still sentiment. But it's not only sentiment. You have a slider for desired and undesired associations. So this is, you can now define, well, you know, these are my 5, 6, 8, 12 desired aspects that I want to achieve. And then you can define topics that you want to avoid because, you know, well, this is a weakness of my organization. I know they're, you know, competitors are better or people don't understand it. They always think of something else. You can put this as the undesired, and then the system measures also with the other color if you successfully were sticking to your desired topics and if you avoided your undesired topics, which is, of course, much more powerful than sentiment and emotions because now you're really measuring the world seen through the lens of your organization and seen through what you want to achieve. Blue, the last two sliders that can be extended, by the way, the sliders are now page views and visits. So that would be the traffic on your website. But it could be any audience metric. So the idea of Wisdom is also to combine content metrics, information you extract from the content, with audience metrics on the consumption of that content. How many people are watching it, viewing it? So we had TV projects, for example, where we were analyzing the coverage with this on a TV program. And then we had the number of viewers instead of the page views. Or that could be your stock price. You could say, well, you know, let's monitor my stock price. And do I see some fluctuations in sentiment, in desired, undesired, etc., that have an apparent impact on my stock price? Various applications. The goal here is really to have one visualization to be able to combine the whole content metric solution, like everything we can learn from listening to the debate, together with some actual behavioral data, what people doing. Concrete example. So this is coverage from 2 years ago, AstraZeneca. And if you remember, it was in March, and there were, this is the same stream graph you have seen before. And the top story here were the blood clots and the vein thrombosis, which people were, if they were right or not, but you know, it was talked a lot about in a connection with AstraZeneca. Now you can see another application of this wisdom chart breaks down the coverage into emotions, acceptance, anticipation as the positive one, going up, and fear, grief, and anger going below the 0 line. And that, of course, gives you a much better understanding what's happening. You see that mostly what happened here, fear flared a lot. Again, the system does not tell you if the fear is justified or not. It's just fear was prevalent in the public debate around that time. So it gives you a better understanding on what's happening just by merely showing the frequency information. The second big part, so story detection, success metrics, and then our question or our quest was, well, this is all nice and good, but sometimes you cannot, you know, the past has happened anyway. So we can learn from the past, but in the end, most of the things that are really relevant, because that still gives us room to react to that event, lies in the future. And there is a lot of information present in stakeholder communication in the public debate about future events. And we wanted to make use of that information. So going beyond that, okay, let's analyze the last 3 months, but you know, what's going to happen in 6 months? Because this helps us then to guide our marketing activities. And this gives you just an example I created this morning. It's the pro version of our dashboard. It's the query on Australia. We have the same color coding, text on the geographic map, but this is now future. So the map now shows from the 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of March 2024. So not only shows the system all these predicted events, but you also have the full analytic capabilities of the dashboard applied into the future. So you see things that, so in a way, it creates a micro event calendar out of any documents that you feed it. by recognizing dates to future events in the coverage. So you have things like there's obviously a moon eclipse upcoming sometimes end of April, or in May, I think it was one of the suggested dates for the Strait Islander referendum. So like all these things that are already discussed and when they're going to happen, you find on the stream graph, and you can explore with all the others. So the same thing you saw before. If you want to see, well, you know, what about the future and what's just happening in Perth, you click on Perth, and you can restrict it on just the events that are going to happen in Perth. And of course, that in conjunction with the editor I've shown you is also very powerful, because that's where we want to build this system together. Let's say you're writing a press release and say, I want to publish it in the first week of March. Then it's very good to know what's going to happen in the first week of March, because it helps you maybe to avoid days where you know, well, I'm not going to get my attention. Or you can actually use some of these events to help you amplify your impact. Well, there's this big event in Perth, and let's send out our information 2 days before, because then we will be the one everyone talks about, rather than missing the opportunity and be, you know, late on the bandwagon and no one cares about a week later. So that's the type of insights we want then to directly feed into recommendations, also into StoryPack. You look like you have a question.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the temporal extraction and then the spatial extraction.
Mm-hmm.
Are they all from text, or they actually from some special thing?
No, they're just parsed from the text. So we analyze the text. We look for future references, you know, things like, you know, an actual date, the 24th of May 2023. Well, then we know it's about that date. Or, you know, in 3 weeks. So there's, you know, other ways you can reference. And pretty much the whole underlying idea of what normally you see the date here is the publication date, right? If you do ex post analysis, you do a trend chart, and, you know, a document on the 10th of February was published on that day. And we just turn this around. We're using, instead of the date of publication, we use the reference date in the document to define when it's being shown on the trend chart. Right. And just by doing that, you unlock the whole analytic functionality into the future events. Okay. So it's all based on data extraction. So data extraction using the extracted dates to give the data. So one document can now appear multiple times. Like, for example, the Strait Islander referendum, I think that is here, and it's not now shown here, but in some of it, I think there were 2 dates visualized. So it would appear in 2 locations, the same document. So in the past analysis, of course, there's always one, cannot be published on 2 different time gaps. But here you can have the same document appearing multiple times. Okay.
That because your time extraction.
Well, because one document can mention 2 dates. Yeah. And then we put it on both.
You put on both. So
on purpose.
Yeah. Okay.
Here it's still counted once, to not to mess up the statistics.
Yeah.
But we do show keywords in multiple locations.
Right. That makes sense. And how much of that is supervised learning, and how much that is completely just based on trigger word?
The prediction itself, I mean, we use supervised learning, but that we applied usually when we and that's actually slides that are upcoming, when we look at real world indicators together with content indicators, then we use machine learning. There is actually there's no supervised learning at all. Okay. We're just extracting the dates.
Yeah. Well, what about location, like, you know, Perth? It's just the word Perth alone. Yeah. It could be the Australian Perth. It could be the.
It uses graph-based disambiguation. It looks at other keywords that are prevalent in the same document.
That makes sense.
And you know, or like Vienna, for example, is also in Austria and the US. You know, and for example, if there's a second city, Austrian city mentioned, then you know the probability that it's Vienna and Austria just went up quite significantly. Okay. Yeah. So it looks at surrounding texts. Yeah. It's not 100%, as you know, it's a heuristic. But yeah, we use graph-based disambiguation for that. Good, that was prediction. Any questions before we go to the third part, the knowledge hub? How are we doing with time? Probably bad, 5 minutes. Can we go 10 minutes over time, or?
I think so. I don't know if there's anything booked after.
Okay, good. Any questions so far? All right, third part, semantic data integration. So this is now the idea. Well, it's all nice and good what's happening in the virtual world, but in the end, often what counts is, real world behavior. We can talk about climate change a lot. If we're not going to reduce emissions, it will not help a lot. And that's the idea of this, that we need to understand the physical processes, and we need to understand also what people make out of it in the virtual space. Speaking to climate change, right? So you need climate models to understand, well, how is the ecosystem working? What are the likely impacts of what we are doing, and what are the scenarios? But at the same time, 100% accuracy of the climate models are not going to trigger any action if you have voted for the wrong party. So political processes, communication processes, how things are perceived, have a huge impact. And you need to understand both. You need to understand the physical world, but also the infosphere. And not only in sustainability topics, financial market. You need to know the fundamentals of the company, but then often you have lots of fluctuations just by the perception. I mean, look at brands like Twitter or Tesla, just to say one example. That's, you have a lot of things that are happening here in terms of valuation that have nothing to do with the fundamental potential of these organizations. And the idea is here to be able to analyze both. We did start with this, working together with the United Nations. So this is, by the way, one platform we maintain it. It's open access, so you can try it out yourself. So you get one version of a dashboard that's customized to sustainability topics, which we started developing for the UN in 2016 already. So it's an SDG intelligence system. So it tries to capture all this content, classify it by SDG, with the goal, the United Nations Environment Program is responsible to collect all these environmental indicators from the member countries, I think 190 or so. So they report the indicators, but they know very little the context. Are people in these countries aware of the problem? What solutions are they suggesting? Maybe some regions can learn from the others. So just by collecting emission data will not help you in that task. And that's why we said, well, the UN is collecting the indicators. We are collecting stakeholder communication, social media postings surrounding those indicators to see what's really happening on the ground. So that was, I think, was it 2016? It was first presented. We continue evolve it, so it's always updated. So it looks like now the dashboard you've seen before, biodiversity classified by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. What I also want to show, and this is the last part of my presentation, is this is still a global system. It shows you global information flows, classify things by SDGs, who is publishing, where, which locations are they talking about. But the power of these semantic technologies is also that you can quickly switch the level of granularity. You can do a global information flow analysis in a click, but then you can also drill down all the way to a very granular level. For example, this is an Austria project, a tourism project, where we are collecting all the discussions around like a major railway and highway connection. And all the emotions that we see here from various different news, companies, municipalities, so all their websites, and we can analyze them separately in different content buckets, because you don't want the online opinion. You really want to know, well, how are government sources reporting on that differently from NGOs? And sometimes the differences between how these stakeholder groups approach a topic are more interesting than the topic they're discussing itself. Or even more granular, this is the city of Vienna. And it also shows nicely how you can overlay with a geographic map data stemming from content processing with semantic technologies, but also from others. So what do we see here? We have these colors here are geotagged news and tweets and other online sources. And you can see the geotagger works down to the street level. Oh, sorry.
My son's not ill. My husband's just cold. Sorry.
So You can see the geotext that you saw before in Perth and Sydney. They actually, if you set it up in a granular manner, you can check it all the way to street level. For example, see, well, there was an event in that street or a demonstration, and you see what's happening there. And then overlaid, these are the other colors. That's the application of public transports in Vienna. So we are collaborating with the public transportation provider of Vienna, including the age groups. We were allowed to do this because the app users were giving explicit all the best. Giving explicit consent. So you can now map not only what's happening, but you see which age groups are visiting which event, for example, or where do they go shopping. So there is a lot of potential now from optimizing your retail outlets to mobility stations. If you provide alternative forms of transport, I don't know, scooters, bikes, any type of mobility sharing applications, you can learn from this data where to put them, either in general by the demand, or you learn from if there is a specific type of event happening, then you see that pattern in behavior. And by knowing that, we can anticipate. And this is, to answer your question from before, where we use a lot of machine learning for this interaction between the data points from where people are and go and the content indicators. Trying also to predict that. So the EcoMove project was actually trying to predict mobility bottlenecks. To say, well, we are monitoring the debate with our prediction, which does not use machine learning, but then it tries to, the correlation between certain types of events and certain patterns of behavior, that we do with supervised learning. And then if we see a pattern that shows, well, there's probably a lot of demand in the 19th district tomorrow because it's the same set of conditions that happened 3 months ago. You better get more, buses there, or you run the subway more frequently to be able to accommodate that. So it's what the city planning does anyway, but this gives you this additional layer of short-term fluctuations that might help you optimize it even more. Because the big events, if there's something in the stadium happening, well, people will leave at a certain time. You need lots of transport, so that's obvious. But this is a lot of additional events. So that's the known big events. But that might be small events. Someone announced, well, let's go demonstrate tomorrow. And it can happen. There's a lot of activists, and then they're blocking the street, and you just know exactly if they're doing the same thing again. Those 2 streets will be blocked, and chaos will unfold in that district. And then you could have a strategy in place trying to mitigate that problem. All right. If you say we do have 5 minutes, this is the last slide actually, trying to show you some of our research projects and where we are heading at the moment with our research endeavors. Do we have time for that?
Yeah. You probably need to be closer to your.
Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I wander around and I forget the microphone. So the April project has been finished. That's where we developed the prediction display. Gentio is our generic deep learning system where we're looking into generative networks and where we developed just quite a few of these base capabilities. One aspect we have here was the text classification with deep learning, and then also impact prediction of a tweet. Evolve was a big data project, also already finished, which was focusing on scalability. Indices and criteria are 2 sort of applied projects where we apply our platform in different domains. Indices is culture, digital culture. Criteria is risk assessment. We do have a project Simple, focusing on explainable AI, especially fake news detection. So we capture, a lot of misinformation sources, and then also through machine learning, identify what's probably a genuine communication and what's probably something that's just out there to manipulate opinions. CRISP is an interesting project on semantic data pooling, where we are integrating our data with weather data So we have the Austrian meteorological organization in there, and trying to what we started in the EcoMove project, predicting mobility bottlenecks based on, you know, there's an event here, an event there, but also including the weather. So weather as being an important context variable that of course shapes behavior. And if you don't account for the weather, if it's, you know, raining or sunshine like today, you have completely different patterns. So that project fills an important gap here, and also tries to predict impact. Not only like, you know, predict the weather, but what impact that weather will have. You know, it rains a lot. Okay, this is, you know, the expertise of the meteorology department. But trying from past examples to learn what happens when there are specific environmental conditions, including weather, that you can learn from the public debate. We do have two environmental projects, SDG Hub and Climate Europe. So this is an Austrian initiative, in a way following up on the system I showed you from the United Nations, but putting this into a much more local context, with lots of local sources going down to the street level. And Climate Europe 2 is this is the project I mentioned with 30 partners, so that's a very large project. It's a support action where we try to create transparencies on the climate services that are being offered in Europe, including a stakeholder map, because often climate services, some people who are offering climate services don't even know that they're offering climate services. It's like a competence landscape, both in Austria and in Europe, probably in Australia as well. There are often efforts to create competence landscapes in a manual curation process. So you have lists of organizations, which products are they offering? They try to keep them up to date, build an inventory of all the climate scientists that are working on a topic, which is of course a never-ending task because it's very dynamic. And here is the goal: we can support this with semantic technologies by extracting organizations, persons automatically, see how they connect. For example, academic websites, a university, you can parse, you see all the courses that are being offered, then you see who is teaching these courses. You can automatically infer, well, you know, where is biodiversity taught in Australian universities? These type of questions we try to answer. Last two projects, Anexa, it's a very technical project that's machine learning for knowledge graphs. So how can we validate and extend our knowledge graphs? Things like slop filling, missing gaps in the landscape, new entities, disambiguation of new entities, etc. So that's happening in Anexa. And Transmixer is an augmented reality project where we want to weave in StoryPack, the editor I've shown you, into immersive augmented reality environments, allow multiple users to edit together, and then hopefully also create some AR compatible versions of some of our visualizations that you can then you not only have the pro and the light version of the dashboard, but then in augmented reality see what type of visualization actually creates some utility for the use cases there. That's my last slide. And yeah, here are just a few of our channels if you have further questions. But as I said, probably the best way if you want to learn a bit more are the papers that are referenced, and then the two dashboard tutorials that go a little bit deeper into the features than what we had time today. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Are there any questions? Do we have still remote participants?